I want people to understand this ordeal. It's taken a toll on both of us.
Casey Anthony's parents respond after 15 years of allegations.
I've gotten blamed for something I didn't do, and it tears me up inside.
This can change our life. This is serious.
This is their final response.
The test is about to begin. Please remain still.
Casey Anthony's parents, the lie detector test. Watch now, only on A&E. And watch next day on the A&E app.
Luxury is meant to be livable. Discover the new leather collection at Ashley with premium quality leather sofas, recliners, and more, all built to last. No matter how many spills, scuffs, or pet-related mishaps come its way, the leather collection at Ashley is made with the durability you need for the whole family. Shop the new leather collection at Ashley and find chairs starting at $499.99 and sofas at $599.99. Ashley, for the love of home.
You can support this podcast at patreon.com/partnersincrimemedia.
Madison Reed. It's the hair color that's revolutionizing the way women color their hair with gorgeous, salon quality, multi-dimensional hair color delivered to your door on your schedule. Join the hundreds of thousands of women just like me,
like you,
who have tried and who love Madison Reed. Visit madison-reed.com and get 10% off
10%
plus free shipping on your first color kit. But you have to use the promo code Crime Writers.
Oh, is that new? That's a new code.
Yes, it's a new code. Thank you for not yelling for a second and responding. It is a new code.
Crime Writers.
Crime Writers. One word.
With a
new
W.
code. Madison-reed.com and use the promo code
Crime Writers. Big plans for the new year?
Big plans!
Squarespace makes it easy to turn your idea into a unique website.
Stop the ad. Squarespace is sponsoring our podcast.
Yeah.
We have our website on Squarespace, Kevin. I love Squarespace.
Well, showcase your work, blog, or publish content, even sell products and services of all kinds in just a few clicks.
Do it.
You can customize everything from look and feel to settings and products using beautiful templates created by world-class designers. And there's nothing to install, patch, or upgrade ever. Head to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, use offer code CWO.
CWO!
To save 10% off your first purchase for a website or domain.
I'm Rebecca Lavoie, and this is Crime Writers On, the podcast about other podcasts and also about true crime, pop culture, journalism. And this week, we'll take an early look at the #1 podcast on the charts, Atlanta Monster. This series is billed as an investigation into the Atlanta child murders, which seems to have been solved in the early 1980s. Does controversial up and vanished non-podcaster and host Payne Lindsay deliver the goods? We'll find out. We'll also discuss NBC's attempt to retell the story behind one of last year's most popular podcasts as Dirty John gets the TV treatment. Joining me to dive into all of that and more is my true crime co-author, real-life husband, fellow Married with Podcast podcaster, and host of These Are Their Stories, the Law & Order podcast, Kevin Flynn. Hello, Kevin.
Hello, Rebecca.
Also with us is journalist, true crime author, licensed private investigator, former defense investigator, certified cat lady, and almost certified Laura Ingalls Wilder, Laura Bricker.
Oh.
Hello, Laura.
I think I'm certified after today. Me and Big Blue the tractor got well acquainted this afternoon.
I got to hear more about that.
I don't think the Ingalls had a tractor, but we'll get back to that.
Must have been an ox.
Also with us is the author behind the brilliant City trilogy of novels and our favorite Clean John, Toby Ball. Hello, Toby.
I did do the Little House on the Prairie and just shoveled.
Yes.
Today.
You are the pa of our Ingalls family.
The Michael Landon.
You are the Michael Landon, but with smaller ears. Laura,
that means he's going to cry every episode.
Laura, this means that you have learned to drive this tractor and you are now officially driving the tractor. What is going on?
Oh, I've been driving the tractor for a few years now, but I haven't plowed yet this year. I was sick during the last big snowstorm. And the backstory is that this is part PSA. When you take the Christmas tree stand out and your husband says, just put it on the porch, I'll take it out later. remind him of that when he goes out in the dark on the porch to get firewood. So poor Fireman Ken stepped in the middle of this thing last night. I thought someone was burglarizing our house. He screamed so loud. There was spikes in the middle of the Christmas tree thing.
Yeah, that's what holds the Christmas tree down.
So he's at the ER, and I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to plow today.
Oh, is Fireman Ken okay? Is he going to be okay?
He's okay. He's on some antibiotics so his foot doesn't get infected because he got some pretty nice gouges from this thing last night.
Jeez. And it's all his fault because he's the one who didn't put it away, right?
He told me to put it on the porch, and then the next thing I know, I was like, oh my God, is someone breaking in?
Sounds like we don't know whose fault it is. It sounds like that way to me. Just saying.
I think it's a Judge Judy decision.
Now, Kevin, you are the king of starting projects and then leaving the stuff with which you did the project exactly where the project happened. Like, for instance, if you need a screwdriver to fix something in one of our son's bedrooms, the screwdriver will then be in the son's bedroom.
Can't you just be grateful that I did the project to begin with? Do I have to get crap about you didn't pick up the screwdriver?
But whose fault would it be then if someone stepped in the screwdriver? The project's? Or
this
yours?
isn't Orange is the New Black where like a screwdriver goes missing and everybody goes in a lockdown.
All right. Well, let's just give a couple quick updates because we have a lot to get to in terms of content tonight, and I really want to get there. Kevin, first up, what the hell is the status of Studio C? Because last week you announced that Studio C, formerly known as a closet in our basement, no longer had the name. What was the previous name? The Podcast Hall of Justice. Before that, it was Square Studio. And the naming rights were up for grabs. And then like 5 minutes later, what's going on?
Well, we have a new sponsor who will get the naming rights to the studio.
We had like a bidding war going on. Like people were like emailing us.
Yeah.
I'm very disappointed. The studio naming rights aren't available. And I'm like, guys, you all know it's actually a closet in our basement, right?
Yeah. Well, our listener Alyssa has stepped up, and she'll get to rename our studio. We're going to decide on what that great moniker is, and we'll be able to unveil it in our next episode.
Will there be a drum roll?
Well, if you can add one, sure.
Is it going to be like the HGTV Dream Home, where like there's going to be a ramp up period, and then we'll unveil it and who the winner is?
Can we do the sound effect we do in These Are Their Stories, where Kermit the Frog comes out and the drummer goes, "Yay!"
All right, we'll maybe do that. All right, so we'll find out next week. One more piece of business. Next week, a lot of listeners chimed in on this, and so, by the way, did Toby Ball. So Kevin and I gave it a look-see, and we decided that this, in fact, should be on the docket for next week. Next week on the podcast, we're going to be talking about the Netflix series Dark. But I have one very big caveat to throw out at our audience when they are watching this series on Netflix. Now, Kevin, can you explain the tech side quickly after I tell them what they need to do? So the Netflix series Dark is a German series, and it is offered on Netflix with English dubbing, meaning you can just hit play and you'll get to see the show.
That's the default.
And the default is that you will see very, very earnest and good German actors with very, very bad English dubbing over, but you can actually fix that, and I would highly recommend watching it in German with subtitles. It is, I would say, like 100% better, right?
Yeah.
Now, how do you do that, Kevin?
Okay, it depends. Most people are streaming right off of the Netflix app or the integration on their smart TV, and some people, like we also have the ability, because we have Comcast, it's integrated in our system, and we watch that way. Either way, there is an option or menu button that will come up.
Language options.
Well, yes, it's language options. It's either in the bottom right-hand corner, like when you see like the streamline, the play and the progress bar. It's either there in the bottom right, or like on the Xfinity app, when you do it, it comes up in the top left. It may look like one of those closed captioning symbols.
Yeah.
And if you just click on that, it'll give the option to decide what language you want the closed captioning in and what language you want the audio to be in.
Right.
So you can watch it any way you want. You can watch it, listen to it in French with German subtitles or whatever. But what we've been doing is we've been watching it with the English subtitles and resetting it to the original German soundtrack.
Which you have to do with each episode.
Yeah, because it'll reset, at least with our interface. Everybody's interface might be a little different, but that's the way we say it. Now, if you don't want to spend a lot of time reading, you can use the the English dub version, it kind of takes...
It's weird.
We started it, and it's not Godzilla bad, but...
It's Godzilla bad.
Yeah, the voice acting is not as good as sort of the original German acting, and whatever.
I'm enjoying
to
it.
To each his own, but
I don't
that's
like
how
things
we
that
like
are subtitled because I like to do other things when I'm watching TV. I'm enjoying it 150% more in the German. I'm just going to say it right now. We're only, 4 episodes in?
Yeah.
I'm really liking it so far.
Again, the show is
wait to
called
talk about it.
Dark?
It's called Dark.
Yeah.
And Toby, you're watching it too, right? Because I think I saw you tweet about it, which is what made me say, we should give this a second look-see because we've gotten so many emails about it.
Yeah, although I had no idea about the whole subtitle thing. So.
Are you watching it with English dubbing?
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Weird.
Oh, God, change that up, man.
Yeah, I'm going to be changing it up. I'm going to replay, when this thing hits, I'm going to replay your explanation as I futz with my TV.
Yeah, I really recommend it.
Yeah.
I'll just say for our listeners who haven't heard about Dark, I know it's trending on Netflix. I know it's really popular. It's a little bit like Stranger Things, a little bit insofar as that there's a band of kids. It's a little bit like Stephen King novels where there's also a band of adults in concert with a band of kids. Yeah. It's a whole lot like the podcast Tanis.
There is a supernatural
sort of
kind of
science fiction
tinge to it, yeah.
It does a very difficult, without spoiling it, a very difficult specific genre of science fiction / fantasy that is often done very badly. It does it really, really well.
So far.
We
might get to the end and say this was a bad idea.
This was a fucking disaster. We don't know. So far, though, so good. So let's just get started getting right into our content for the night. Kevin, can you please read this for me?
True Crime Podcast Update.
What an update it was. Last Friday, Dateline NBC's weekly, quote, reporting on true crime stories focused on John Meehan, better known to podcast listeners all across this fine land as Dirty John. The hour-long episode of Dateline NBC relied on interviews with Deborah, a.k.a. Stupid Deborah.
It's not Stupid Deborah. It's Dirty John. It's not Stupid Deborah.
Her daughter Tara and John's first wife, as well as podcast host, LA Times reporter Christopher Goffard. Before we get into the TV version of this Dirty John story, Kevin, can you just fill us in on Dateline as a TV show? Because we've gotten feedback on our Facebook page, and I know that I don't watch Dateline a whole lot. And I always forget, when I haven't watched it for a long time, when I do, how unbelievably cheesy it is. Yes or no? Can you please explain this show to us?
Each of the 3 major networks have a show like this. There's 48 Hours, there's 2020, and Dateline NBC. They all originally started off as news magazines.
And now they're true crime shows.
In the vein of 60 Minutes.
Right.
But they have morphed into what is easy to do and gets an audience, and that is rehashing true crime stories. Not too dissimilar than what happens on Investigation Discovery or Oxygen, these cable networks that just do nothing but this.
Right.
But if you spend a lot of time and you watch Investigation Discovery, and there are some shows that are better than others, it's hard to remember that at the network level, there are actual primetime shows, legacy primetime shows, that this is the formula.
Yeah.
So it isn't relegated to, premium cable or basic cable true crime television. It's always been on the network. And some have embraced the genre in different ways.
Right. It is a little weird to me to see the anchor of the nightly news broadcast,
Lester Holt,
that we watch. We actually watch NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt, also anchoring this.
Right.
And that's why every time I watch it, I'm so confused.
Right.
I do remember,
he'd done it for years and years before.
Right. But this show used to be more of a news show.
They all were. That's how they were all first, dreamt. But look, we know this. There's been cutbacks at TV news and whatnot. And how do you fill an hour of programming? You can't do. Jeff Rossen comes on the Today Show every other week. And I don't want to say shit about Jeff Rossen because I know one of the producers. I worked with him at a TV station.
And Jeff Rossen seems like a nice person.
He's nice. But some of the investigations are so fucking lame.
How many peanuts are actually in your peanut butter?
Yeah, it's like you just can't pull that out every week. So that's why true crime works, is because not only because people watch it, because there are idiots like me and you and Laura who've written books on this stuff, and they just go, hey, you've done all the work. How about we do an hour on what you know?
Right.
Yep.
Well, let's talk about what we know, because
Okay.
I think a lot
Let's get
of
into that, yeah.
people who tuned into this Dateline tuned in possibly because they had heard the podcast Dirty John.
Mm-hmm.
But also here we have a story that turned into a podcast that is now a TV, quote, news product about a story that was in a podcast.
Yeah.
Very transparently. Laura Bricker, did you learn anything new in this Dateline NBC version of Dirty John?
No, unless you count like seeing a picture of the nice little house that they rented out on the fancy island.
Yep.
No.
Balboa Island.
Yes, I was like, oh, those look like interesting places. So no, I mean, it was a very, I felt, superficial rehash of the podcast, using the players from the podcast to tell them the story. But, you know, for me, I liked seeing the people that I had heard on the podcast, even though I had looked at, you know, the pictures online and links on the Los Angeles Times website when Dirty John did come out. You know, it was interesting to see the people talking and their mannerisms in person. But aside from that, I felt like very superficial and glossed over a lot of the story as well.
Yeah, speaking of which, glossing over the story, Toby, they didn't just gloss over the story, they glossed over a whole character in the story, because in the Dirty John podcast, there were very prominently two daughters. There was Tara, who ends up being, you know, the person involved in sort of the climax of the story. And then there's the whole other daughter, who's the one who puts the tracking device in the car and the one who kind of moves the action forward in the podcast. And she's very conspicuously absent from the TV version. Toby, what did you take away from this TV treatment of Dirty John?
Nothing. So I like seeing American hero Skylar Sepulveda.
Oh, teenage badass.
Yeah, even though you only saw her for like 30 seconds.
Don't you think the whole thing could have been about that girl?
But yes.
She looked just like I thought she would look too, right?
Yeah, she kind of did her TV thing the way she seems like she did the whole thing with Tara being stabbed. She's just like, oh, yeah, uh-huh. And
like no special makeup, no special clothes.
Yep, this is where I sit when I'm a lifeguard, right here.
Yeah.
The only thing that I thought about afterwards was, you know, just the different level of journalism and detail and presentation between the podcasts, which I think we all agreed was really well done, and this, which it's hard to make a boring show about this, so it wasn't boring, but the writing was absolutely god awful. Mm-hmm. Like the way they describe Deborah's job, where she's, you know, in the podcast they say, well, she basically she like sets up real estate properties, right, for people to come and take a look
She's
at.
Staging and she does interior design.
Staging. Yeah. And in this it becomes like she owns a, you know, furniture company, and, you know, it sounds like she owns like 3 different companies, but they all basically, when you combine them together, just mean staging. You know, I guess I wasn't really surprised by anything other than like how ridiculous Keith Morrison is.
Kevin's favorite TV correspondent.
He's bizarre, and some of the stuff he said was so weird.
Right. He looks like a cult leader, right, Kevin?
I said he looks like how somebody would draw him on South Park. You know, like this big head with these like weird wrinkles.
And there's also the delivery.
The delivery.
You have like a Keith Morrison that you
Death do us part. Like, a long time ago, I was contacted by NBC to do a piece on the book Wicked Intentions. They wanted to do something, and it was either going to go to Dateline NBC, the network, or it was going to go to one of the shows they had on their network. I don't know if it was True TV. It was something. It was a channel honest to God we didn't get.
Clue or True TV.
Yeah, whatever.
Those, yeah.
You know, they have their production company does all these different things, and you know, I was like, oh yeah, trying to like talk them into like the
Dateline.
producer about getting us up to Dateline NBC, and I was like, hey man, I will do, you know, whatever. I will Keith Morrison's to get on NBC, and you know, but here's the thing:
Did it work?
But would you?
I did, and I never made it.
Me too.
I hashtag me too. Oh, come on, that's not me. But you know, the funny thing is that the producers kind of, there was an email exchange about Keith Morrison, kind of like wink, wink. They kind of get his gestalt. They are the ones who write the stuff for him to say after the interviews, and they are writing to his sort of
his voice,
his shtick.
Right.
Yeah, he is kind of that cheesy, but like the people who like write his scripts like make him even cheesier.
So one of the things that stuck out
because
to
they
me
love it. Yeah.
was that when we were talking about the podcast, we talked about the very, and as you know, I'll say it again only because I just want to be clear.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like when people talk shit about women's voices and the way they come across.
Right.
However,
yeah.
The women in this family have the flattest affect of any people I've ever seen or heard.
Do you think it was different than in the podcast?
I think it was exactly the same as in the podcast, which is why they kind of needed, I think, to use TV stuff to juice it up. Deborah, by the way, I think comes off pretty sympathetically.
Mm-hmm.
We hear in the podcast that she's like a beautiful older woman, and she is, in fact, a beautiful older woman. Tara.
And the mentioning of Tara having PTSD at the end almost felt like an apology,
an afterthought
to the listener. Like if you've been wondering why she hasn't been,
if you've been wondering why she's so weird
as
or whatever,
this person from last week, yeah.
But one of the tricks they do to sort of animate, because Tara, drives a lot of the narrative forward in this Dateline thing, and one of the tricks they do is something that one of our listeners commented on. A couple of people on our Facebook page, Margot Donahue, for instance, says, "Am I nuts to say I was surprised to find out how handsome she was?" Meaning John. No, you're not nuts. He was in fact more handsome, I think, and we saw as many pictures of him than I thought he was too. But Lisa Thompson says, "I do have one question about the episode. WTF was going on with putting a bunch of cameras in a car and then showing repeated shots of Tara viewed through the steering wheel
from the front,
from
the
odd
back,
angles,
from the side. Yeah.
just driving around silently alone in that car? How is that any way relevant or illustrative of the story? They must have been desperate for B-roll to fluff up their 42 minutes of the same 5 photos."
Yep.
Repeated over and over again of Tara and her dog gazing thoughtfully at the ocean or strolling on the beach. So
I agree, Mrs. Donahue.
Yes. So that's actually Lisa. That's not Mrs. Donahue. That's Mrs.
Sorry.
Thompson.
Sorry, Mrs. Thompson.
So Laura, Tara.
Yes.
Do you think the driving was necessary to make us able to withstand the flat affect of the delivery of this, what should be very exciting story?
I don't know. I shouldn't tell you this, but I actually fell asleep in like the last 15 minutes of this, so it didn't work. I was like, this is enough. I felt like they were doing it, like they were trying to make it like she's out investigating John, driving around. They were trying to, they definitely, here she is again, like Nancy Drew. But it when they used the same clips over and over, I was like, and they used the same photos over and over as well, which was really driving me batshit. I'm like, oh, we're looking at the same photo of John in the water again. I don't know if it was necessary, but they tried.
Now, Toby, speaking of photos, I know you have feelings about a photo that we were shown that a law enforcement official used to prove Tara's, innocence in terms of like her killing of John, that she's sitting with her dog in the hospital and that was supposed to prove something or other?
Yeah, well, they have that assistant DA or whatever he was, and he says, this picture says it all. It's a girl who's trying to do the right thing and her dog, and they're in the hospital or whatever. And it's like, what? Like it seems like again and again, it's like these people who are prosecutors are like basing things on like looking at people and trying to figure out whether they think they're guilty or innocent by the way they look.
Right.
It's Charles Manson and his cat.
If it was like a Latino or an African American like teenage boy who'd saved her,
and he was in the hospital with his dog,
and he was in the hospital,
yeah,
it would have been like, well, maybe it's homicide because he doesn't look innocent,
he's
by
just
my
sitting there with his
standards.
dog. He looks casual.
Yeah, so it's like if it was the first time we'd heard it, like of all the things that we've listened to, it'd be one thing, but it seems like again and again and again. Oh, just look at him. I took a look at him and tried to think about, his soul. And it's like, Jesus, what about the evidence? Like the guy had like a kit in there to like abduct and kill her.
Right. It's not about her picture with the dog.
That's the thing that made you think that she probably didn't attack him. My feeling was they didn't do Tara any favors.
Right.
She's just seems kind of out of it.
There's also that weird thing that happens after, which I don't think was in the podcast. You correct me if I'm wrong, where we hear that right after she kills John, when he attacks her and she kills him, she goes and sits on the curb and they call her mom, and they put her on the phone with her mom, and she's like, I told you this would happen.
Yeah.
I told you this is exactly what would happen. And I'm thinking like, That's a super weird way to say that. Like it's almost like saying like, I told you bananas would be on sale. If you just waited a day, it would have been 30 cents less. It seems like super casual, right?
Well, she's in shock, and
yes,
you know, I mean,
I know,
and
that's why I hate to
can't-
say it because I'm always the one saying like, you shouldn't judge people's affect. We shouldn't talk smack about women. These women do not do themselves favors when they give interviews.
Yeah.
But then why do they put it in there? Like, if she's supposed to be, she's like a sympathetic.
Yes, she is. I don't disagree. She is a victim.
She's the heroine of this story, and they put in all this stuff that makes her look bad.
I know it looks bad, but
I think they tried to make her look good.
Yeah.
I think this is as good as it gets in terms of like her ability to communicate.
I think as a producer, if I were writing it, I'd be like, this is an important piece of audio because you get this, you can get her sense of what happened immediately after the attack.
Right.
Now, maybe it's this weird affect or whatever, but the phone call is interesting. What if you didn't hear it, it's like, and I said, Rebecca, what do you think that phone call was like when she called her mom and said she killed John?
I would think she was screaming. I would think she was hysterical.
Yeah. What do you say? How do you start it off? Don't be mad, but
I told you this would happen.
Yeah,
I'll tell you, this was my kind of problem with it. So the Dateline thing obviously has its own problems as a TV product, right? But this was also my problem with the podcast, was that we were asked to invest in a story which we kept being told was going somewhere, and the narrative forces in the story, the women telling the story, were sort of the least relatable, flattest women in terms of like their affect and in terms of their ability to actually advance a narrative. It all just feels very surreal.
Yeah, and I'll say like the storytelling took the same turn as the podcast, where we start off with this anecdote about an attack and somebody being dead, or the implication that somebody is dead. And you mentioned before, well, we never got the older sister. Now, we don't know if she just didn't want to participate, but by not having her, either on purpose or not, I think a lot of television viewers who don't know anything about the story would think that the sister isn't there because she was killed in the beginning.
Right.
So there's that suspense, and so there's a twist for those people at the end that, no, it was John who was killed. So I don't know. I mean, I think like you have to wonder, for the people who heard the podcast and then watched the show, what did they get? Versus people who watch the show not knowing anything about the podcast, who may now listen to the podcast.
Right.
Who's actually a better served consumer?
The podcast listener, because the part that I felt was really missing in this, that you really got a sense of in the podcast, was how many times Deborah would like say she was going to leave John, and then he'd come up with a story and she'd go back, and then she'd leave again, and then he'd come back. And I don't feel like they really got to that in the Dateline show.
Yeah.
If I was just watching the Dateline show, I wouldn't have maybe gotten that same feeling of just how manipulative he was and just what a hold over her he had, in that she kept going back. Because I feel like they said she left and then she never went back, the way that they described it.
Yeah. So Kevin, I did an hour-long special on the Adnan Syed case.
Right.
And we hear, of course, that the Tara Grinstead case from Up and Vanished, for instance, and then we saw the Maura Murray case brought to a TV show. Are networks bringing these podcast stories to a larger audience, or are they just trying to ride the coattails now of podcasters?
I think that they are just trying to, ride the coattails. I mean, I think that a lot of the podcasts are like a proving ground. We see even like in the fictional ones, like Homecoming, right?
Homecoming.
And Lore, which is actually very good.
You're enjoying Lore on Amazon, right?
Yeah.
Our friend Aaron Mankey, by the way, congratulations to him for
4K looks awesome.
Aaron Mankey is crushing it in the podcast /TV/ writing world.
Well, he's got a book as well.
He has many his books that
he had
like
several books. That
his
just,
rejected novels are now being published. He's also, by the way, I don't know if any of our listeners listen to Lore and like know Aaron Mankey, and I know on Twitter he's like a really like fun like advocate for like not taking any shit. We met him at that podcast conference where I went to. He's also like the nicest person in the entire world.
Very
Fellow New
unassuming.
Englander, super unassuming, great guy.
Yeah. But whether it's like, getting on people's coattails, it is. Because certainly everybody sees, this is something that the true crime audience is into. And that includes book readers, podcast listeners, TV viewers. And, this is the hot thing. We're going to chase the hot thing. They've always done that.
Yeah.
And the only problem ends up being that podcasts are hours and hours long.
Right.
Books are hundreds of pages. So when you try to distill it down to a half hour or an hour, you're missing so much, and podcast audiences are so sophisticated that they know everything that's missing.
Right.
They can argue all the points, the legal points that are glossed over, and so they don't do as well. They're not as satisfying. They're certainly not as satisfying as the great healthy smoothies I get from Daily Harvest.
Oh, no, they are not.
Yeah.
They are not as satisfying as the smoothies from Daily Harvest.
Because I don't have time to chop up fruits and vegetables and throw them into a smoothie.
I'm just going to say right now, I cannot wait for you to read this promo code so I can write it down and order me some more Daily Harvest. I am missing my Daily Harvest, Kevin.
You are? Well.
Hand me a pen
No.
now.
How about I hand you this? A Daily Harvest smoothie.
Daily Harvest smoothie.
That's right. Daily Harvest sends superfood eats straight to my door with a choice of smoothies, activated breakfast bowls, or nice cream vegan sundaes. So I have here a cup. It's like an 8+ ounce cup.
Yeah,
and
it's a 12-ounce cup.
12-ounce cup. Inside there are ingredients to make a smoothie. Rebecca, big letters. What are the ingredients to the watermelon cucumber smoothie?
It's very transparent. Watermelon, cucumber, raspberry, coconut water, lime, chia, and sea buckthorn. I'll be honest, I don't know what sea buckthorn is. It doesn't matter because I promise
That's
you.
SEA.
From experience.
That's a superfood.
This
yeah.
smoothie is going to be de-freaking-licious.
Is there polysorbate 80 in this?
Nope.
Is there a yellow dye number 7?
Gum?
No.
Nope.
This is it. This is fantastic stuff. So each single serving cup comes, ready to blend or heat. The cups are stored in your freezer, so ready when you want, and you just take some milk or coconut milk
or
water, put it in.
Or almond milk.
Yeah, put it in your blender.
Or skim milk.
Yeah, those are the milks, Rebecca. Thank you. That was helpful.
Yak milk.
They're
You're like Forrest Gump.
Yeah, goddamn. Goat milk, cat milk, whatever.
Shrimp milk.
Anything with nipples produces milk. We know that. Their produce is organic and unrefined, and it looks as amazing as it tastes. Take photos of it. Put it on social media.
I love these smoothies. There's even a straw hole in the top of the cup. You pour from the blender back into the cup, and that cup becomes your serving cup. Look right there. There's a little straw hole right at the top. It's amazing. It's a beautifully designed product.
It's great. Go to daily-harvest.com and enter promo code CRIME. And get 3 items free in your first box.
I'm doing it tomorrow.
Yeah, promo code CRIME for 3 free Daily Harvest cups at daily-harvest.com. That's daily-harvest.com.
I love me the Daily Harvest. What else you got, Kevin?
Well, if you're a small business person or large business person...
I'm a small business person.
Yeah. Have you tried to hire somebody lately?
There's no room in this closet, but if there were, I would. In a heartbeat.
Well, I can tell you, I was having a day job.
Yes.
It's hard out there to find, qualified workers are a problem.
At my day job, it's very hard to find good people.
It is. This is the kind of labor market we're in right now. Great, unemployment's low, but it's tough for you if you're looking for qualified quality talent. So where do you go to that? You can go to a job board and hope that the right person finds the job. So the place to go is where people are going daily to grow professionally and explore job opportunities, and that's on LinkedIn. 70% of the U.S. workforce is there. That's the pond you want to be fishing in.
Yep.
Yeah, you already know LinkedIn is the world's largest professional network. Well, it's also the better way to find great talent. Just ask any of the hundreds of thousands of businesses who have posted to LinkedIn jobs over the past year. 22 million professionals view and apply to jobs on LinkedIn every week.
That's a lot.
And a business is only as strong as its people, and every hire matters.
Yep.
Especially if you're in a small business.
Yep.
Every person is super important. So don't settle for posting or hoping the right person will find your role and apply. You go to linkedin.com/crime, and you'll get a $50 credit towards your first job post. LinkedIn, of course, I don't have to spell it, but I will anyway. LinkedIn. LinkedIn.com/crime. Get a $50 credit. Terms and conditions apply.
Can I just, before we move on, just mention one note that Toby sent me? Toby sent me so many notes about our content tonight that when I wrote them down for this podcast, I just was laughing as I was running my pencil along the page. 2 of them for what we were just talking about. One of them was, I honestly can't imagine ever wanting to watch Morrison again. And Keith Morrison is a fucking lunatic. How does that saying go? Till death do us part.
The way you said that. If you haven't seen it, it's on NBC.com.
It is. It is. So thank you, Toby.
See, I had this weird vision while I was driving of Keith Morrison and Nancy Grace dating.
Oh. You do not want to touch me there. But do I?
Just like imagining what the conversations would be.
I can just imagine like Done Disappear doing a Keith Morrison. It's like the one person they didn't do in that season was Keith Morrison. Oh my God, so good, so good.
A cake.
Well,
but is it really a cake?
Speaking of delightful products that involve true crime for us to talk about, let's move on. Let's have our premiere conversation tonight about Atlanta Monster. Controversial non-podcaster Payne Lindsay is back. This time teaming up with How Stuff Works for the podcast Atlanta Monster. This series looks at a series of kidnapping and murders of dozens of young black boys in Atlanta from 1979 to 1981. In 1982, Wayne Williams was tried and convicted of killing 2 victims, but not everyone believes that Williams was responsible for the Atlanta child murders. Now, last week we made a promise, and I will do my darndest to stick to it, that despite our history and feelings with and about Payne Lindsay's work and personality and self-promotion, we would listen to Atlanta Monster with open ears, open minds, and as the coach says on Friday Night Lights, open hearts. So let's try to get that done. First, let's just discuss the case really quickly. I certainly remember the Atlanta child murders case, the promos they play in the podcast. It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are? Mm-hmm. Those played in the TV market where I lived, Kevin. I know we shared a TV market, so I play where you live too. Toby Ball, I hate to call you out as the elder among us, but you are, in fact, the elder among us.
Where were you at 10 o'clock?
What do you remember about the Atlanta child murders? Like, what do you remember it being like when this case was unfolding in the media?
This is when I was in graduate school. That's not true.
Wow, you're older than I thought.
We're all like really silent for a second there. I was like, what?
I was like, hold on a second. Do you really believe that I'm in my 80s?
We have to go back to what it was like in the 1970s.
I know the saying, it's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are? I didn't connect it to this case, but I do remember the case going on.
Right.
I think I was in middle school probably, to the extent that you follow stuff like that in middle school. You know, it was sort of in the media.
Right. Well, I think when we all heard that our friend Payne Lindsay was going to be hosting this new podcast, we had expectations that were set with Up and Vanished, the Tara Grinstead podcast, and his delivery style. I was surprised to hear right up front on episode 1, and we should mention, by the way, that for our listeners who have not listened to this at all, who don't want to be spoiled and hear us hear the details, but just want to hear whether or not they should listen, we will put in the show notes where we're just going to give our thumbs up, thumbs down, listen or not. And you can fast forward to that timestamp right now.
You can't really spoil it. We don't really know what's going on.
That's true. We're only 2 episodes in.
Yeah.
But just in case there are twists and turns. But you know what? Don't do that. Just go ahead and listen to this. But in case you don't, we'll put the timestamp in there. I was really surprised to hear in the first episode, it really start with like a solid half hour of almost no Payne Lindsay. We hear these the story of these 2 brothers who grew up in Atlanta at the time, like provided some color. We hear the historian who sort of gave the context of what was going on in the black community in Atlanta and how this case affected the community. And we hear from this brother of one of the victims of Atlanta child murders. Laura, what did you hear about all these voices that we hear right at the top of this series who, provide some credibility to the story that we're about to be led through?
I was, I think, surprised that we didn't start off with more Payne Lindsay. Of course, I'll get to that. Once we get to Payne Lindsay, all I could hear was John David Booter, and I couldn't handle it.
It's hard not to, right?
And I was like, did he always sound like this? Did I forget this? Anyway, but, leading into this, I thought it was really interesting in terms of the context of the time that this was happening and people that, were good sources, that were good voices to put a window into that time as to, what it felt like to be there and what it felt like to be involved, and also the racial element to what was going on. And that was a very big role. And And so I thought that it dragged for me at points. Like the reporter in me wanted like a nut graph, like what's going on, what's happening, who's here, where are we going?
Yeah, and to be clear, what you're talking about is they never said what the child murders were, how many children were murdered, and in what time period. They were no details at all, right?
Not until much later. And it was like, so we just have these guys, and they were interesting to listen to, but I was just like, okay, when are we going to get to what this is about?
Now, Toby, there's a lot of tape. Some really, really good, some, not as good. What did you think of this first episode, how it was organized and how we're brought into the story with all these other characters and not just a narrative of what we're about to hear and what the story actually is?
I thought what they were trying to do was kind of interesting, which is to sort of give a sense of what it felt like to be there at the time when they're trying to figure out what's going on and kids are disappearing and it just seems mysterious and scary. I agree with Laura that it would have been helpful to have like a little bit of context because to me, knowing enough about what happened, it was easy to put everything in context. But I kept thinking like if you really didn't know much about what happened, would any of this kind of make sense? It seemed like it was a little all over the place. Like it wasn't. Most of the stuff I thought was interesting, but it could have really, I think, with like 2 minutes worth of tying things together or providing the context. And it didn't even have to be narration. I'm sure that you could find a piece of news footage or something from the time that would kind of describe what was happening. So I kind of felt like that contextualization was missing.
Yeah, so Kevin, the production quality, the quality of the field audio itself, good, right?
You mean the interviews?
Interview audio.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So we, I think, maybe have quibbles with the structure of the story because we rely on a host or narrator to tell us what it is, why it is, what it is we're going to hear. We get very little of that at first. The only thing we kind of get is Payne saying, I didn't know anything about this, but my business partner mentioned it and it made me interested. Is he playing?
No, you also get I didn't know what to do, so I just brought my camera and went there. Didn't know what I would find.
Right. Is he playing dumb or is he dumb? Like, which one do you think?
I don't know.
No, I'm serious. I don't just
mean
mean
is he being like folksy, like gee shucks,
or
is he trying to really a valley girl?
Is he trying to do that thing where he's like, I don't know anything about this, and I'm going to assume you don't too? So because I think the audio, the field audio we hear, is smarter than that narration.
Yeah,
it feels like
the interviews are good.
Bipolar, right?
Look, yeah, like I'm going to preface all this by saying I really wanted Atlanta Monster to either be really good or really bad.
Right.
So I could talk about it. And for me, it's kind of like in the middle. And, I wish I had a thumb sideways because I probably would eventually wind up there. It's just, I wanted to be able to come on and be like, I'm a big man and I'm going to give Payne Lindsay credit for doing a good job. And it's so middling. And this is why, to me, the stories of the individuals are interesting, but they are just left to go on and on and on without any curation. They're not curated at all.
Or narration.
Well, yeah, narration
that makes
any way to sort of edit and take control of it. If this were like in a book, like all these quotes, like I forget the guy's name, but the Marine from
the brother of one of the victims.
brother of one of the victims.
Yeah.
Like his whole story about his brother going missing and the burial was really interesting and really compelling. But if you were to read it on a page, it would just look like transcription. There's no other authorial shaping to it.
And it's not his fault.
That's what I mean.
He did a very good job telling the story.
Look, you can decide to get out of the way of the story.
Right.
But it ended up being such that it seemed like it rambled on without any shaping to it.
Right.
And I just felt like, in using entire television news packages, like all of the audio, it just felt like they were padding the episode to get to the second commercial break. It just felt like
You mean episode 1?
In episode 1.
Because episode 2 was very different to me than episode 1.
Yes.
It was more structured.
It was more structured. The characters were more engaging. I don't know how stuff works is contributing. If Payne Lindsay is the talent on the show, there should be some producers around that can handle the talent and make him better.
Right.
And I don't know who's writing, and it just he sounds like he's reading a book report.
You went way ahead of me.
What did
there.
I ask? Yeah.
No,
I forget,
that's fine.
That's everything I have to say. No.
That's fine. If we're tipping hands, I'll tip mine. this podcast has some compelling and interesting and good and beautifully produced moments.
It does.
And then the minute Payne Lindsay or that dopey-ass techno music comes in.
Oh, the music.
It's mixed poorly. I know, and this is what I mean. I love the idea of using synth music. I love the idea we're in the Stranger Things era, like Stranger Things, Blade Runner-inspired music. Let's just listen for a second to the way a very, very good interview is presented in this podcast with this dopey-ass music. Hit play on that, Kevin.
There were 1,000 searches all over the city. One place was Red Wine Road in South Fulton County. If you go there today, it's right off 285. There's a huge shopping center with a Target.
Okay, then pull up the other clip there. All right, so here we are again with the Stranger Things sort of idea.
Kids biking.
Yeah.
What we do with videotapes is a little different from what we do with print materials. The videotapes will have to go into coolers because they need to be acclimated from the cold, dry environment. When they move upstairs, it's a little warmer and a lot more.
Nobody cares about this.
Humid, so they have to go in the cooler so the temperature can come up slowly.
Why? I mean, but what's missing is we now know, Laura, as you said in your note to me, we know where all of these TV packages that we're hearing came from, right? Because we know it's not easy. You used to work in TV, Kevin. To get TV tape from 1980 is not easy.
No, that's on film. Some of that just degrades. It's not around.
Was there a minute where Payne Lindsay himself told us as the narrator, I wanted to get a sense of what the media was like around this, so I found the people who were holding this in a vault, and I went, it was none of that.
No, it was the dumb ones. I needed to find out what it was like in 1970. But every time he talks about like his age or like that he didn't know, like oh my goodness, I was surprised to learn about the trend of psychics in the 1980s. He just loses all gravitas.
Right. But Laura, do you agree with me that like, as far as like a piece of tape goes, that thing the second piece of tape we just heard, I mean, the first one, as my 16-year-old son pointed out, is like the scene in The Social Network where Justin Timberlake is in the club trying as the guy who invented Napster, talking to Mark Zuckerberg, and like the music is super loud and they have to scream because they can't hear each other. And my son was like, yeah, but in that movie it was cool because they were in a club, but I'm just listening to a podcast. Why can't I hear that guy? This one is just like, we're hearing this interesting tape about this guy talking about preserving this TV tape, but why? We're never told why.
Why he's preserving it, or why this like loud music is overshadowing everything?
Why any of it?
I think, well, you know what it is? I think that they are trying very hard to look. I mean, this was my sense as I was listening to this, and I was like, oh, instead of hearing Atlanta Child Killer, I'm thinking of the little Stranger Things kids biking around right now. And I was like, okay, so they're looking at something that was recently successful, that recreated the feeling of the 80s, and they're trying to implement that and use that in the podcast format, but to a point that was just so overdone. Like if that had been lightly in the background, it might have been a different story. But it was like the first one, like I was sitting here at my desk kind of like rocking out. I'm like, wow, I didn't realize when I was listening to that in my car just quite how loud that was.
Right.
So I feel like they're trying too hard to be cool.
Right.
I mean, that's what I took away from it.
Well, the other thing that I really want to talk about here is the writing. The writing for Payne in particular. I don't know who's doing it, and I don't know who's editing it, and I don't know who is in my newsroom, and even in our podcast world, in the closet in our basement. We write things for audio, we read them, and even with my stupid show about HGTV, I will play the tracks out loud that I've read and edited and recorded for you, Kevin, and you'll say, yeah, I would cut this, and this, go back and re-record this and just say this, and we'll like have an editing process. It doesn't really seem to be, it's either not present or they're just trying to write so much for Payne's voice that we're not actually getting kind of what we need. And you know what? I don't know if I'd be so hard on it if this thing just sounded bad, if it didn't feel like it had potential. But Toby, what do you think of the way the narration in this show is written, for Payne in particular?
Yeah, I don't think it's really doing him any favors. There's just a few things that kind of stood out to me in the first episode where he doesn't do a ton of talking. But then when he does, it's always kind of like a head scratcher. Like it would just kind of stop me for a second, and I'd be like, "Did I like blank out for a few seconds and miss something, or is there some aspect that I'm not understanding. There was a point at which he was talking to this woman named Kalinda, and she was talking about changes in the African American community in the late 70s, early 80s, and about how there was a little bit more wealth in the community. Race relations were a little bit better. And then Payne Lindsay says she describes an atmosphere of fear and hopelessness.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
What are you talking about? And then she goes and starts talking about the fear and hopelessness involved with the disappearances. But it's just like, there's just like a disconnect. The transition is not there. Like all he had to do was say, but.
Right.
But she also describes. And then there was another thing where he's like, even up in North Carolina, he heard about these killings. It's like, it's not like there's a town crier who's like yelling that from Atlanta that you can barely hear in North Carolina. It's on the news. He talks about it being like the big national story later.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't want to be too harsh.
I think he reveals a lot of his weaknesses as a journalist or as a storyteller.
Or even just as, I can't imagine like reading a high school essay.
It's tough because I think that it's a disservice to journalism. I mean, I have gotten a couple of emails about this podcast basically repeating other outlets' reporting, which, it's a valid criticism.
So far, 2 episodes
but
in.
I actually haven't read like other outlets reporting, so I can't speak to that. I can say that's a valid criticism. I can also say that this is audio, so it's a new version of reporting. But there's a problem when you have clips where someone says something and then the narrator says something that either invalidates or makes sound stupid the thing the person just said. Play this clip for me about one moment in episode 2 that really stuck out to me.
Popcorn dealt with all the records and files in the FBI. And just like Mike McComas, he stressed the importance of a composite sketch they received early on in their investigation from a kid who told police that a man had tried to abduct him.
Well, it was a black male with bushy hair. I remember the composite sketch very well.
After interviewing the kid, they were able to form a detailed sketch of the suspect, a black male with bushy hair.
Is that telescoped or is that...
That's exactly as it
there's
aired
no
in the
edit in
podcast.
that? Oh, jeez.
It's exactly how it aired in the podcast. What is wrong with that, Kevin?
It's called an echo lead where
It's
you
also
say
inaccurate.
exactly the same thing that...
It's also inaccurate because the guys basically said... all we knew was a sketch of a black man with bushy hair. And then Payne Lindsay says it was a detailed sketch.
Oh, detailed sketch.
Of a black man
And with bushy hair. Yeah, it doesn't seem really detailed.
It's like they're not listening to the clips they're planning to play when they write the narration, or they've written the narration before and then changed the audio. It's very hard to figure out what the editing process is here.
It is. And also like at the end of the first episode, it finally declares itself as what Atlanta Monster is, and it says it's an investigative podcast.
Right.
We're 2 episodes in, and we still don't have a sense of what exactly are you investigating.
Exactly.
What aspect of this? Because Slow Burn isn't an investigative podcast in Watergate. It is a historical look back and different things. Now, is that what Atlanta Monster is, or if it's going to be? Well, we're going to look deeper into who actually killed some of these kids.
Right.
It has yet to say that.
Right.
And so, what is your raison d'etre of this podcast?
Yeah, it's almost like there is this idea that Payne is going to discover things. But the things he is discovering are things that other people in the podcast are just saying out loud. Here's a good example of that.
Popcorn and McComas both mentioned FBI profilers, the people who formulate an idea of who the killer is, who the FBI should be looking for. And there was one characteristic that stood out to me immediately.
It had to be a black guy.
So
What's happening?
Now, Laura, this is a great example because what he's trying to do here, what the story is trying to do, there's a weakness in this investigation. Now, I don't know a ton about the Atlanta child murders. I remember them happening. I remember the case, and I know the guy's in prison for it. The only thing I know that's controversial about that guy's conviction, the only thing I know as a lay person who doesn't know anything about this, is that the cops profiled and the FBI profiled and said it had to be a black guy. And they arrested and convicted a black guy and basically closed off investigation of any other kinds of suspects.
Right.
And that comes up in the podcast. But the way Payne voices that, even though we have 8 people on the podcast saying they were only looking at black guys, as he says. There's one thing that stuck out to me, as if he just discovered that. Laura, what do you think they're investigating here?
So I think they need to, they're branding this the wrong way, because this is not, I don't consider this an investigative podcast. I consider this like a look back at the Atlanta child case and the impact it had on the area. Like, it's kind of like a reflection podcast. I don't know. Although there was one part when Payne said, I didn't know what I was going to do, so I thought I would just go out and start talking to people. And I brought my recorder conveniently, or whatever it was. So, I don't know, because I feel like right now what kind of the MO of this podcast is so far, which, we have interesting people, but we have interesting people who lived during the time or had a connection to the case, reflecting on what it was like to be involved in the case. And we have news clips interspersed in between these people. And then we have, is it just me? Because it was a long time ago when I listened to Up and Vanished, but has his voice always been like that? Or was John David Booter just such a great
influence on your thinking?
Or did he just do Payne Lindsay so well that now I cannot even hear Payne Lindsay? I just hear John David Booter, because every time he goes to talk now, I feel like, oh my God, does he really talk like this?
Yeah. It's both.
It's really something.
With Up and Vanish, it was the plucky, gee whiz, I'm a young guy and I have the audacity to go out and do this thing. And so you're rooting for him, and it's kind of like,
it didn't sound like he was trying to read in Up and Vanished.
It didn't sound like, this isn't really.
In this podcast, it sounds like he's trying to read, and it doesn't sound like he's good at reading. Like, not.
Yeah.
I
think that's what it is.
It sounds like, and you know.
No, I know what you mean. You don't mean illiterate.
He's really forcing it when he reads it. Like, choose the correct devices using the drop-down controls. Like, it's just like too.
Yeah. There are some people that are good on-air talent, and there are people that are good producers, and I don't. He's just not he's not an exceptional on-air talent.
Now, Toby, I actually do think what they're going for here, and we heard a clip at the end of episode 2 that hints at it, is they are going to look at the potential that they arrested and convicted the wrong guy for the Atlanta child murders, Wayne Williams. Because we hear tape of ostensibly Payne getting interview tape of that guy in prison, right? Don't you think that's where they're going with this?
I guess. I think they hinted a little bit at it, maybe. And maybe I'm giving them too much credit, but when they talked about the guy who called in and said that, and told them where they could find a body, and said that next body would be a white kid, and do you remember that part?
I do.
Yep.
And then there's like, well, maybe it was a copycat, and so I don't know. Potentially like looking at the edges and thinking that there's more than one person working, or I don't know. They've got to do something. It's like 8 episodes long, right?
Yeah.
We've gotten 2 episodes and they've captured them.
Well,
so there's got to be something there. And again, it's like who's doing the writing. So another thing that kind of stuck out to me was when they find the 2 bodies, and then like down the slope there's this Playboy magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And Payne's like, well, it seemed like an open and shut case. And I'm like, what the fuck? Are you seriously? Like, that's you as an open and shut case?
Yeah.
It's like, just on the face of it, there's no connection between like somebody who gets some kind of sexual payoff from killing young boys is probably not going to then go and pick up a Playboy.
Right.
Like down the slope and then just leave it there.
Right.
It was that kind of thing. And it's disappointing because I thought the rest of episode 2, I thought was both interesting and I think pretty well done, and especially the part where they're talking about actually capturing Wayne Williams. I thought was I thought they did a really good job of. It was sort of like an action scene in a podcast, which I imagine is more difficult than it seems, and I found it pretty compelling.
This is my real problem with this whole thing. The parts that are good are really, really good. Mm-hmm. And then there are parts, like the parts where Payne Lindsay is talking about he's like pretending like he is the first person to ever notice something that happened. Mm-hmm. And then the things that he says that he notices are ridiculous. Like when he says he was able to discern a pattern. Play that clip, Kevin.
The FBI, along with local police, were not convinced they were dealing with a serial killer. But as the death toll of black children was growing, they began to recognize similarities in the murders. It would start with a child going missing for days, weeks, and sometimes even months.
Yeah, that's the pattern.
The pattern is children are missing and murdered, and you know it's a pattern because it starts with a child going missing.
I'm sure all the cops who worked on the case were like, oh, thanks for that.
If only we had noticed the pattern that kids were going missing for days or weeks or even that is the stuff. It makes me.
I think it's okay, like, for a podcast, like, you want to, sometimes the narrator, you want to make it his or her journey. We're following his journey. Think Serial, right? And it's okay, they give their thoughts and their observations, but when the observations are so pedantic, it's like you almost want to say, okay, step out of the way. And again, it's like, I really don't want to just take cheap shots at Payne Lindsay, but he's got some quality material to work with, and I don't know. I mean, Toby, you asked who's doing the writing. I don't know. Listen to the credits. There's nobody listed in the credits. We have more people listed in our credits here.
The music guy is listed in the
music
credits.
guy, and that's it.
Johannesburg.
So I don't know who is responsible, who takes ultimate responsibility for the script and for the way the clips are edited and for the overall direction of the podcast. It doesn't say. I guess we have to assume it's Payne Lindsay.
Kevin, I have one pop quiz item for you.
Yeah.
As I mentioned a second ago, there are parts of this podcast, I'm listening to it today, and I'm like, this is really good. This is really good. And then something happens where I'm just like, ugh, now I'm 100% out of it. I need to get back in again. Quiz, what is wrong with this clip?
Your call has been forwarded to an automated voice messaging system. Is not available. At the tone, please record your message. When you've finished recording, you may hang up or press 1 for more options.
Hey Mike, my name is Payne Lindsay. I'm currently doing a documentary project about the Atlanta child murders that happened in the early 80s. I'm looking for the Mike McComas that was working for the FBI at the time on the case.
All right, Kevin. What is wrong with this part of the podcast?
Okay, well, let's see. Why is it that we can hear the incoming voicemail message and the outgoing voicemail message sounds like it's on the other end? Is it possibly because that was, I don't want to say faked, but recreated?
It was an audio trick. It was
an audio
stupid, unnecessary.
Maybe you'll say the way that they hooked up the studio is that's the only way. They can only get the audio off of that.
Bullshit. I call bullshit.
I don't know. Yeah,
instead of just saying
draw
cleanly,
your own conclusion.
Instead of saying cleanly, we got to talk to an FBI guy who worked in this case.
Why
which, by the way,
Why
is a great. Like, it's like, oh, they have FBI.
Yeah.
That would have been impressive.
I was really surprised by the FBI guys participating. Quite honestly,
it was
because
great. Right?
I found
weren't they great?
Because I found. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but like federal agents are really hard. I think to get to talk for something like this, and these ones are long since retired. But I thought that was a pretty big coup. So I was glad to hear their voices.
I rolled my eyes at it because, again, I thought it was unnecessary. And that's what everybody accused him of in the previous podcast was faking telephone calls and re-editing them. And
I'm sorry. That was not the message he left for him. If he did, we would have heard his mic'd end of it.
We would have heard. It would have sounded clear on his end.
Right.
On the recording.
Yeah.
And it just is it's a cheap effect that you can do in audition. You pull down the menu. It's a preset to make it sound like it just is lazy.
And it's also unnecessary.
The whole thing, again, I just felt like this was added because you had to get to 45 minutes.
Maybe
it just felt like a school essay, though. You just kept saying, this is very, 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 very important.
Yeah. Well, Toby, one of the things that Payne does is he talks about the victims at the end of episode 1, the 30 victims on the list, which, by the way, he never actually says what the list is. He just says their names weren't on the list. And
I think
I'm
we're
like,
supposed to assume we know.
What list? What list are we talking about? It's the kind of exposition I actually want. I want to hear there was an official victims list.
Yeah.
And if your name was on it, you were an official victim. And if it wasn't, you weren't. We never get that. We just hear there's a list. What do you think of Payne reading the names of these 30 victims in this case?
I get what he was after. I do think that there's a certain power to reading the names of the people who are missing or killed or whatever, just seeing the enormity of what happened. I don't know if he just doesn't have the voice for it, or I guess maybe if I hadn't known who he was or whatever, maybe it would have felt different. But in that, it just seemed like grandstanding a little bit.
Yeah,
that's just my take. And I don't want to. Again, I feel kind of shitty. Like it's just like piling on. Whatever he did as far as like assembling clips, especially for episode 2, if that was stuff that he did, that went really well. Credit where it's due, but I kind of just feel like the stuff where he's talking, including that bit, is just it's not well thought through.
Yeah, well, it's mixed. Sounds like we're all mixed. So why don't we do that thing we do and let our listeners know? What do we think? Should they check out Atlanta Monster from Tenderfoot TV / Payne Lindsay? How Stuff Works. It is the #1 podcast on the charts as of this recording. Should our listeners check it out? Laura Bricker, I'm going to start with you. You know what? I'm going to give you a break, Laura Bricker. Toby Ball. I'm going to start with you. Toby Ball, what do you think?
Okay, as I said, I don't even know if the mic picked it up when that guy was talking about how they preserve film, and I said, no one cares about this. I think there was stuff, there was definitely filler, some stories that went on long, and then the stuff where Payne is a presence didn't work out so well. But I think for the most part, especially the second episode, I really enjoyed the second episode. I find that even the Payne stuff, even if it's annoying, it's not so annoying that it sort of overwhelms the other things. So if we'd reviewed this after the first episode, I would have probably wavered. But I thought the second episode was really strong for about 80% of it. So I think I probably will keep listening in the hopes that it continues in the vein of the second. So I would give it it's not even like a qualified thumbs up. I mean, I would give it sort of the B thumbs up.
A hesitant thumbs up.
A grade and a thumbs up.
But it's not super hesitant. Like I think there's a lot of really worthwhile stuff in it.
Okay.
You just have to wade through a little bit of stuff that's less worthwhile.
All right. Laura Bricker, what about you? You're up. Thumbs up or thumbs down on Atlanta Monster?
Well, yeah, I feel a lot like Toby. Like if it wasn't, if we didn't have all the background with like Payne Lindsay, and also if I hadn't just listened to Done Disappeared and just like I couldn't stop laughing every time he talked because I'm like, God, he sounds just like the John David Booter thing just was very distracting to me because it was just such a perfect impersonation. I don't know anything about this case prior to this, so I mean, I was like 3. I lived in Vermont. We had no TV, so it's an interesting case, and I think there are a lot of voices sounding in that are going, hopefully, that are good people, like the FBI people. That's interesting. So I guess I'll give it like a medium thumbs up because I think give it a try. There's a lot of good stuff in there, and that's the hard part because it's not all good and all bad. It's not like I'm like, oh, this sucks, I'm not listening to this again. It's like, no, there's some good content there. You just have to kind of get past the Stranger Things music and the like very earnest, overly staged narration that's going on.
Now it's my turn, right?
Yeah.
This is really hard. It's hard. I told you, Kevin, right before we taped this podcast, I didn't know what I was going to say. I've listened to all of you, and I've listened to myself, and here's where I've landed. Of course, if this podcast, the narration were well written, even if the narration were in the same place as it is, and we needed more exposition and didn't get it, but the narration was smart and, well written, and there was some editing, and it didn't sound so jolly, golly, gee whiz, I didn't know, blah, blah. I would say, thumbs up. It's interesting enough. I just keep thinking, like, I think a lot of our listeners would like this. And my review here is not don't listen. My review is really based on the fact that if I were eating an apple and there were a worm in the last bite, I wouldn't say that was a really good apple except for the worm in the last bite.
Right.
I would say there was a worm in my fucking apple. So I can't do a thumbs up. I can't. Even though 80% of this is actually pretty good. I can't do it because the parts that are bad make me want to stab myself in the eye with a fork. Yeah. That's how I feel about it. I just, and it's hard. I know. And I just want to say to our listeners, like, I am acknowledging I have baggage. I tried. I was pleasantly surprised by 80% of what I heard. I really was. The voices in this podcast are compelling. The story is worthwhile. The case is worth looking at again. The racial elements are fantastically interesting, relevant right now in our America right now. There are so many things about this case that are being brought to bear that are interesting and cool and worth hearing. the parts of it that suck real bad. And that's not enough for me to bring it to thumbs up. So I'm sorry. Thumbs down for me.
Was it Longfellow who did, like, when she was good, she was very, very good. And when she was bad, she was horrid. That kind of reminds me where you're going there. So, look, I know we have, like, some of our coolest listeners are tweeting and Facebooking to us saying they like this. And there are many that are from that area.
I don't judge people for liking it.
No, it's fine. I've never said you shouldn't. Because I like or don't like.
But this in particular, I feel that way. It's actually pretty good. The parts that are good are good.
The parts that are good are good.
Right.
Like and again, I really wanted to be able to come on and to say, hey, I'm I'm the bigger man or whatever, and just say, look, I will admit it. He's got a good podcast going here, and I didn't want to say, oh yeah, it's Wikipedia Brown in the case of the Atlanta Monster again, but I just. It's not a thumbs way down for me, but it is a thumbs down. I mean, I think that this really could have used a better polish, and maybe emulated more of what This American Life and Radiolab does with long pieces of audio. Just because you have a compelling story, don't let someone go on for 3 straight minutes about their life without doing some kind of balance and editing it and whatnot. It ends up taking a good story and making it run on and get boring. And it's too bad because it really has, such good source material. And as far as all the raw material, it's there for an interesting story. I don't know. Episode 2 was better than episode 1. I have a feeling that episode 3 will be better than episode 2. And we'll find out more about where he wants to go. Which he should have said right in the beginning. Yeah.
Do you think this was a project that Payne Lindsay was tapped for because of the success of his previous podcast? That there are good people working on it? They pulled him in to narrate because they knew it would be successful if he was in it? Or do you think that this is a good project that's being dragged down by Payne Lindsay? Or do you think this is Payne Lindsay who accidentally created a good project that he's unfortunately attached to?
I don't know. The only clue I have is that there's nobody else listed in the credits.
Right.
Which just makes me feel like...
Well, there's How Stuff Works.
Yes, but who at How Stuff Works?
Yeah.
Who's the script supervisor?
Yeah,
Who's the executive producer?
Yes.
Who is the researcher, the fact checker? Who is
the fact checker? For God's sake,
who is the line editor? Is he putting this all together himself? There's nobody. Everybody benefits from having a partner or an editor or somebody going over and pointing out your weaknesses.
Yeah, don't say that, Payne.
Yeah.
That's grammatically incorrect.
Hey, Paul McCartney was great with John Lennon, but you put him by himself and he writes Wonderful Christmas Time and shit like that.
Yeah, but Wings had some good songs too.
Yeah, but here's the problem. Who's gonna look at Paul McCartney and say, Paul, that's a shitty song? Could be like, really? I'm Paul McCartney. The same thing happens to Stephen King.
Are you saying that Payne Lindsay is the Paul McCartney of podcasting?
I am certainly not.
Please.
No, I get everybody benefits from having an editor.
Successful.
And so I don't know. When I heard all the archived audio, I thought, oh, this is where How Stuff Gets Done. What is it called again?
How Stuff Works.
How Stuff Works came in, that they're like, oh, this is the support that we're bringing to this.
Right.
I don't know. I think that it has a lot of rough edges.
It's thumbs down.
It's a thumbs down, but look, I'm not. It didn't put me to sleep.
Yeah.
Certainly not the way that Brooklyn and Sheets helps me slide off to sleep. Oh, Brooklyn and Sheets. Brooklyn was founded in April 2014 by a husband and wife team. It's Vicky and Rich Fulop, and they have
I love them.
Yeah, they have the philosophy that people deserve simple, beautiful home essentials.
They're right.
Without luxury prices. They were in some hotel, I think it was in Vegas, and they were like...
You're just making that up. It wasn't
I'm
Vegas.
not I'm not making it up. They were in Vegas. They were in a
Hoboken.
hotel. Yeah, that's right. They were at a Motel 6, and they're like, damn these sheets. And they're like, everybody should have sheets this good, and how do you get them without getting too expensive? Well, that's how Brooklyn was born. They're the fastest growing bedding brand in the world, and because people love these products, they have over 12,000 5-star reviews. I know that Toby gave them 5 stars. You love your Brooklyn and sheets, right, my friend?
I do love my Brooklyn and sheets. They're pretty much, they come off, they get washed, and they're back on the same day.
You don't have Plan B sheets, right? You don't have a second pair of sheets. You have the one pair that you just rotate in and out.
Yeah, the Plan B sheets are actually Plan R at this point.
It's time
Something
to
terrible
invest.
has to happen.
It's like that backup parachute. We
now
just
I
need
know
it
what
just
I'm getting
in case.
Toby for his birthday. So a second set of Brooklyn and Sheets.
Yeah,
there you go.
It's luxury bedding underpriced. You have to try these sheets. We love our Brooklinen sheets so much. We know you're going to love them too. Brooklinen has an exclusive offer just for our listeners. I swear to God, it's just for us.
All right.
You get $20 off and free shipping when you use promo code CRIME at brooklinen.com. In fact, Brooklinen is so confident that you'll love your new sheets that they offer a risk-free 60-night satisfaction guarantee and a lifetime warranty on all of their sheets and comforters.
A lifetime warranty on sheets. That's incredible.
It is.
It is.
It is. There's no reason not to give these sheets a try.
There's no reason not to give them a try.
The only way to get $20 off and free shipping is to use promo code CRIME at brooklinen.com. That's BROOKLINEN.com. Promo code CRIME. Brooklinen. These are the best sheets ever.
You know, we had people saying on Twitter this week that they try to say crime at the same time I say crime, and that's a game they play and listen to our podcast.
Oh, I hope it's a drinking game.
Crime. What else you got, Kevin?
Well, beginning Tuesday, January 23rd at 10, 9 Central.
Is this a TV show advertising on our podcast?
It is. WGN America premieres your next addicting mystery thriller.
Tell me.
The new original series Bellevue, starring Academy Award winner Anna Paquin.
Ooh.
Of course, you remember Sookie Stackhouse.
I love me some Anna Paquin. The piano, for which she won her Academy Award.
Well, now Anna plays Annie Ryder, a detective in the small town of Bellevue, where a transgender teen has gone missing. And everyone in town is a suspect.
That sounds very good.
Yeah, these are the people that Annie's known her entire life, and now she's going to have to investigate them all. Meanwhile, the strange riddles and clues Annie keeps receiving make the case even creepier. Are they connected? Is someone from her troubled past messing with her?
Are you Keith Morrison?
Well, you're just going to have to watch to find out. The series also stars Alan Leach from Downton Abbey. He was the Irish one, the good-looking one.
The chauffeur who married the youngest daughter?
Yes.
Who then died, and then he became like the son of the family?
Yeah, somehow they hated him at first, and they accepted him with $1 million. Never mind. It's good. The critics are raving that Bellevue is original, ambitious, and it stands apart. Plus, Anna Paquin is gloriously good.
She's a great actress.
So don't miss the series premiere of Bellevue, Laura. It's Tuesday.
I won't.
January 23rd at 10, 9 Central on WGN America, home to the most scripted crime shows on cable.
Wait, is that our DVR for that?
Yeah, or you can go to WGNAmerica.com to find the channel in your area. So don't miss the series premiere of Bellevue, Tuesday, January 23rd at 10, 9 Central on WGN America. We get crime.
I kind of feel like we've grown up now that we have a TV show sponsoring our podcast. Now it's time for a little something I like to call the Crime of the Week. An Englishman is in recovery after a terrible assault. One he did to himself.
Ooh.
The man tried to stifle a sneeze by pinching his nose and closing his mouth. With nowhere else for that building pressure to go, the man ruptured his own throat.
Oh, my God.
The esophageal explosion also caused damage to the 34-year-old's chest and lungs, and he was hospitalized for 7 days.
They blew up from the inside.
Unable to eat or swallow food. The man's case of the booger blow-up was recently published in the British Medical Journal. Physicians say a sneeze moves at 150 miles per hour, so do not hold it in. Despite what your mom says, you should loudly sneeze. Just do it into a handkerchief. Or, as we all know now, do it into the crook of your elbow, right?
Like a vampire.
That's right. So, panel, your mom told you to cover your mouth when you sneeze. And she was wrong, apparently. But what other health-related taboo that your mom taught you to do or not do you break with regularity? I'm going to start with you, Laura Bricker.
This isn't necessarily something my mom told me not to do, but I know I shouldn't be doing this. I have been using the tap water in my neti pot, despite the warnings about the brain amoeba. And I am every time I do it, I think I'm biding my time before the brain amoeba comes to get me.
Yeah.
So, there you
Laura,
go.
you're not alone. I tap water in my neti pot, too. I'm all cool with my brain being eaten as long as I can breathe. Toby Ball, what about you?
Yeah, I'm usually super obedient, so I don't know. You know, sometimes I drink beers when I'm taking antibiotics. I know you're not supposed to.
Well, I'll say one of the things that I do, and I'm sorry to anyone on this panel or any of our listeners who are completely disgusted by this, I don't understand and I don't get the whole putting paper down on the toilet seat in public restrooms.
Oh, you don't need to.
I don't know what disease you can contract through the skin on your fatty ass. But I just never do that. I just don't do it. I can't do it. I think it's stupid. I just sit. I don't hover. I just sit right down on the seat. And, I've lived to this age, 44. So far, no ass disease is coming my way. What about you, Kevin?
I actually did a radio news series about that,
Do
about
you need
medical
to cover
myths.
The toilet
That was
seat?
one of the things. And the doctors say, so long as your skin is unbroken, that you can sit on the toilet, you're not going to catch anything.
Yeah, from sitting on a toilet seat?
Yeah, there was all these myths, and it was like, that you'll go blind if you read in dark light. You'll strain your eyes, but...
That's not where I thought you were going with go blind.
Yeah, that's a myth, too.
What about you, Kevin? What advice that your mom taught you do you not heed with regularity?
Flossing.
Yeah.
Fuck that noise. It doesn't really work.
I floss a lot.
If I get something stuck, I'll go get it.
Yeah.
But just,
Telling you should floss. It'll change your life.
I've heard studies.
Ad hoc flossing.
Yeah.
It's flossing is fun. It gets all the gunk out. It's really fun.
No, it isn't.
Laura Bricker, before we wrap it up, do we have a cat of the week this week?
We do, and you got to bear with me. It's a good story. I have to read it to you. Our cat of the week is Elgato. It's Vanessa Kinsey's cat. Do you know about this cat?
No, it's just funny what you said.
No, but that's Spanish for cat.
Okay, well, I didn't take Spanish. I took Latin. So anyway, he has recently been through quite an ordeal. So I look at the picture of the little tabby cat and I go, oh, that's sad. But then I read on because more tweets came. On January 1st, 2 weeks ago today, my house burned to the ground. No. My husband, 2 dogs, and I got out safely. As soon as we were out, I screamed, the cat, where's Elgato? My hubby bravely re-entered the house to retrieve our beloved 12-year-old feline. Soon my husband, at Jeremy B. Good, was outside with Elgato in his arms, but this was one unhappy cat, and he wiggled his way out of Jeremy's arms and bolted into a billowing smoke cloud. It gets better. At this point, we had no idea where he had gone, but we had gotten him out of the house, so at least he had a chance. The rest of the day was a blur of flames and smoke and firemen running all over my property. The house was a total loss. It was traumatizing, but I wanted to know where my beloved kitty was. At the end of the day, after the last fire truck left, we searched for Elgato, but to no avail. The low was about 7 degrees that night.
This story better have a good ending, Laura. I'm just saying.
It's building up to suspense here.
Right.
Although Elgato was an indoor-outdoor cat, I knew it was too cold. I was worried he wouldn't make it. The next day, unbeknownst to us, our neighbors combed through our 5 acres looking for Elgato, and they found him.
Oh.
He had hidden under a gazebo and braved the cold night, and they were reunited. So... a friend of hers recently noted that Elgato is no longer a regular cat. He survived fire and ice, so now he's a #dire cat.
Oh.
Wow.
He's also on Valium now because of the trauma, but he's alive. So that's an amazing story. I'm very happy for Elgato because I always love it when I see cats getting rescued from fires and the firemen carrying them out. But that was a tale.
Now, Laura, as the wife of a fire chief, will you say to our listeners, with actual advice, do not run back into your house after your cat if it's burning down, right?
No. And honestly, what he has told me is that for the most part, cats will go hide under a bed and they'll find them in there.
Right. But poor Elgato, he made it. I'm glad to hear it. We should probably end it on that note. Laura Bricker, if people want to send you their very brief anecdotes for Cat of the Week next week, or Dog of the Week, or Pet of the Week, how can they find you online?
At Laura Bricker.
And Toby Ball, if listeners want to write to you and perhaps send you the next recommendation for the Thumbs Diagonal podcast that they should be listening to next, how can they find you on Twitter?
At TobyBallNH.
And Kevin Flynn, people want to reach out to you? How can they find you online?
I'm at Kevin P. Flynn.
And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram if you want to see pictures of lots of dogs at Reb Lavoie. You can also check out my other show, HGTV and Me, and These Are Their Stories, the Law and Order podcast. You can tweet to this show at Crime Writers On and join the fine folks in the official Crime Writers On Facebook discussion group. Or just leave a comment on our regular old-fashioned Facebook page. Go to our website to sign up for our newsletter and buy swag. Subscribe now to Stitcher Premium to get exclusive ad-free content from our team. If you love this show or any of our other podcasts, please tell a really smart friend about it who has lots of other friends. And if you haven't done it yet, leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It makes a big difference. Line production is done by the very handsome, soon-to-be DC-bound Henry Lavoie. Our theme song was performed by Rocksteady Freddy and the New York Ska Jazz Ensemble and used with permission. This show was recorded in Studio C, otherwise known for now as a closet in our basement, where we keep the cash we hope to give out as a reward someday. On behalf of all the crime writers, thanks so much for listening. We will catch you later. Got it.
Sorry about that, guys.
They
just don't fucking write this like radio
to me,
script.
because
No, apologizing to them.
I'm the one who has to cuddle that back into the podcast.
Yeah, I know.
It's like an extra 40 minutes worth of work you just made for me, motherfucker. Because you can't read.
Man.
You're the Payne Lindsay of the closet.
You have like non-radio people writing radio scripts.
Partners in Crime Media.
Beginning Tuesday, January 23rd, WGN America premieres your next addicting mystery thriller, the new original series Bellevue, starring Oscar winner Anna Paquin. She plays Annie Ryder, a detective in the small town of Bellevue where a transgender teen has gone missing. Annie starts receiving creepy riddles and clues that could be connected to the case. Critics rave Bellevue is original, ambitious, and stands apart. Don't miss the series premiere of Bellevue, Tuesday, January 23rd at 10, 9 Central on WGN America. Go to WGNAmerica.com to find the channel in your area.
Luxury is meant to be livable. Discover the new leather collection at Ashley with premium quality leather sofas, recliners, and more, all built to last. No matter how many spills, scuffs, or pet-related mishaps come its way, the leather collection at Ashley is made with the durability you need for the whole family. Shop the new leather collection at Ashley and find chairs starting at $499.99 and sofas at $599.99. Ashley, for the love of home.